Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Evil curse and demons lurking in my family. Okay, I guess I never really posted on X before. Well, since I never really believed in demons, ghosts, or other worldly entities. Where to start? I was raised in a Christian house, but by the age of 13, I regarded myself as an atheist. My mother would always tell me to pray and protect myself from evil spirits that lurk our family, which I never really believed in until a couple of days ago. I recently found out my mother's side of the family all use black magic to gain money and anything they desire, and in return they would sell the souls of their kids, so I believe. While my mom was a teen, her and her cousin, whom she regarded as her sister, saw a medium who told her he saw her future and it is full of death and desire. At that point, my mother brushed it off as nonsense. Skip 6 years down and my mom and dad are happily married with 2 kids, me and my sis. Out of nowhere, my father died and my mother fell ill too, but no one could explain it. I was about 5 years old, I am 19 now, when this happened, and they both looked like they were going to die. Their health had deteriorated badly. As a matter of fact, my father literally smells like death, and I can honestly smell that scent till this day. My mom said I got on my hands and knees and prayed for God to save them. She claimed no one had ever taught me to pray, and I was a naughty and cheeky child, and this was so out of the ordinary for me to pray from the bottom of my heart to save my parents. My mom started to recover after a couple weeks while my dad fell seriously ill and died. Following that same year, we had about 5 relatives all die, including my mom's cousin. My great-grandmother also died that year, and I remember driving to her funeral service, which was late at night, going to some old countryside village where she grew up. The ride there had so much mysterious thing happen. At first, we saw people dressed in white robes walking in the middle of the countryside at 3 a.m. in the morning. Bear in mind, this place is rural, like you won't find a house in about 2.5 miles from each other. Everyone in the car was a bit spooked by this, so we brushed it all off. Then as we proceeded with the journey, the car died. So my uncles got out and tried to fix it while I was falling asleep. I would dream of a red blood sky and be at a massive tombstone praying. Everything had a red tint. My nan woke me up because she said I was shaking while sleeping, but as soon as I opened my eyes, I saw this shadow figure standing outside the car, while my uncle's unwary fixing the car. Then out of nowhere, when the car started going again, we saw the people in robes just standing at the side of the road. We drove past and never looked back again. Skip to now, and I was recently an atheist, or agnostic to be more precise. Someone had told my mother that her grandmother was a witch or practiced black magic, and so did my grandmother, who is alive now. My mother dismissed them as lies until another person, not related to the previous, said that the death in our family is a curse because of my grandmother. The curse is said to kill family members for money and good health, or ruin your life if you do not give money to the elders of the family. When my mom was young, a rumor spread around our family that my grandmother was a witch, and now is it all starting to make sense? My grandmother was offered help by a priest to remove the curse, but she refused to, and coincidentally, the priest was bedridden for a couple weeks and we never saw him again. Another lady tried to help uplift this curse, but all her children became ill and gave my mother a warning, saying that her mother has evil demonic spirits helping her, and she cannot help us in fear of her health. By the way, all these people that offered us help did not want anything in return. We have one new person my mom found, and she is saying the same thing. I kind of believe this now, guys. Has anyone had similar things happen in their family?
Is my family cursed? How do I break it? Literally watched my father stab himself in the chest twice after crying inexplicably for 4 hours straight when I was a kid. Mom leaped off the roof of my elementary school building 5 years later. Lived with our uncle until he overdosed on his heart medication. We're not sure if it was intentional. My older brother took care of me after that until he lit himself on fire. The other uncle was murdered by his wife, who was later murdered in prison. My cousin has been hospitalized numerous times for self-harm. Nobody in my family I've ever met has seen the age of 33. I'm the only other member of my family left. It feels like my days are numbered as well.
So in Mexico, my dad's family has a house, and it's always been super uncomfortable and weirdly cold. It's his aunt's house, and it's beautiful, and is a mix of mid-century modern exterior and semi-traditional colonial interior. Yet as soon as you walk into the house, the atmosphere changes. Usually you chalk it up to the vibes of the people who live there, but not here. It feels weirdly out of place, like you're the odd one out. One time we were eating there and we felt like someone walked past us and went out the door. Like we felt the little rush of air and the feeling something moved and then the door moved open. We all kind of just looked up then at each other and my aunt said, "También lo sintieron ustedes?" You guys also felt it? And we all said, yeah. We laughed it off, but it was obvious it put us all on edge, while it didn't really bother my aunt as it was commonplace by that point. Another time, while on vacation with my father's best friend who is a priest, we went to bless the house. About 3 years ago, we were walking around with a candle and holy water blessing the doorways, portraits, rooms, vehicles, and the inhabitants. In some places, the light would flicker or dim, while walking around certain spots, the flame would almost flutter. But then we went to the basketball court, where they parked cars. Man, I shit you not. The candle blew out. The priest assumed it was the wind, but we both knew there was no wind as soon as we stepped away from that specific area. It turned back on. Same house, underneath the staircase, there's a little spot that always feels so cold, but a weird, really uncomfortable cold accompanied with an uncomfortable, uninviting sensation. My dad had a tough upbringing, jumping around from house to house. He stayed a few years with my aunt in this house, and he would always tell stories of loud crashing noises at night, blankets getting yanked in the middle of the night, and a lingering feeling someone is there. It's honestly sad because that family has always had a real streak of bad luck. The owner of the house, who I'll call my uncle, owns a lot of land, and on one plot he said his workers started seeing some weird shit. It started with a glowing blue orb-light thing that left them feeling an intense primal fear. They witnessed it twice by about 4 different men, so us naturally being guys, we decided let's check it out. As soon as we got to the land, it was weird. There was a vibe, like an unsettling one. There was this mound, like a small little 20-foot wide, 3 feet tall mound, with rocks encircling it. On top of there, it felt especially intense, like when you're in an old cathedral with those really intense painting and bloody Jesus statues. It exuded an aura of reverence, except this vibration was uninviting. We were with the priest who was with us when the house was blessed, and I shit you not, man. It all adds up. It was most likely a native burial ground, or at least a place of religious significance, mainly because the soil was soft and the rocks surrounding the circumference seemed to be structural. Something was buried there, either humans or items of importance, but it was undeniable. We left because it was getting dark and the vibe was getting really heavy and anxious, like a lingering ringing in your ear. What was also curious is that sprinkled across were what seemed to be little broken fragments of terracotta. It could have been from something more recent, but out of safety, I didn't pick any up. I'm just not trying to be cursed, you know? That's not the end of it. This is where it gets dark and sad. So like I said, they've always had bad luck, but it got worse. While visiting here in the US, my aunt's daughter passed away in a freak traffic accident. It was extremely sudden and shocking, and left a lot of questions. Months pass, and while yes, you can dismiss it as the real-life horror that are cartels and organized crime or just cruel coincidence, but one of my uncle's brothers, who we'll call R, got into some trouble with the cartels. He owned tractors and he'd loan them to farmers to collect their crops, and when the cartels came in, he was coerced into buying their stolen diesel pay a tax. R didn't want to pay the taxes they set in place, so one day, about 3 years ago, they went looking for R, and they chased him from the ranch to the warehouse where my uncle worked, who also had his run-ins with the cartel, him owning a warehouse and silo, so they ordered him to pay a tax. Foolishly, R decided to hide there, but my uncle was there, 2 of his sons and his grandson. They easily tracked him down and they found him. They then killed all 5 of them, that entire household minus my aunt, killed in one evening. Now yeah, I know it could be just coincidence, but it could also be some seriously bad luck, or even something worse. Most of that family were businessmen and business owners, and my uncle in particular was said to be a man with a lot of debt, always borrowing money and loaning and making business deals to pay off other debts. A lot of people who made business with him sometimes got the short end of the stick, potentially putting them in ruin, so it's not too crazy to think someone would be distraught enough to place a curse on his family. Now back to the house itself. You see the house I talked about, where it stands now. It used to be a place where travelers would stay the night. A bit of a roadhouse, I guess, from way before the revolution, and people would wander in, get rest, eat and go. Drifters, travelers, and outlaws would all stay the night. But as all establishments of that type, it was common for the sick to stop by there on the way to see doctors in the city. stopping there for shelter, but sometimes, and most of the time, it was too late and many passed away there. And my aunt has said on multiple times that it is very, very likely that there could potentially be bodies buried underneath. I didn't mention it, but we also blessed the warehouse where they passed away, and we did it the same day we blessed the house. And it was also pretty uncomfortableness. The candle flickered and whatnot, and even multiple of my cousins have reported some spooky stuff going on with strange lights, noises, and phones ringing with no calls or trucks randomly turning on. But I later found out my uncle was letting people do like curation masses there, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that there was just some sort of weird energy permeated in that warehouse and that family in general. Family members immediately began to try to rationalize the tragedy, and one of my older cousins who frequented the house said that her and my aunt's daughter would stay up at night playing Ouija, and my family, being devout Catholic Mexicans, ultimately decided that's what caused the tragedy.
TLDR. My dad has 5 brothers and sisters close in age. His dad was a gamekeeper type, and the family had to move around a lot. They stayed in ancient little cottages in rural towns around the UK. My dad and Gran have told me a few stories about spirits and odd things that they've seen. If you want any more, there are a lot. My dad and his 3 brothers went out to look for birds' nests to take the eggs. Dad took a spade because he had this thing about finding treasure. After digging a few holes, he found a small statue. He described it as an imp or devil-like creature in a sitting position with small horns and weird tendrils coming from the head and neck. It was made of bronze and had a hole in it, so could have been for placing on the top of a walking stick. He took it into the house and gave it to his mum, who just put it above the mantelpiece. But that's it. His dad found it and took it into the woods and threw it into a pond. Dad was on a bus to his job with 1 or 2 of his brothers and a few mates. They worked at a hospital as porters or something similar. As you got closer to the place, there were huge old-style chimneys for incinerating the bodies. They all saw an intense blue light come from one of the chimneys and rise up and into the sky. I've asked 2 of the other people present, and they say this did happen. One of the cottages they lived in had had a few deaths in it. My Gran would put my aunt to bed, but every night at 7:30 p.m. she would wake up crying. So my Gran goes up at 7:20 p.m. and sits on the stairs so she can just see the cot and hear. At 7:30 p.m. a dark shadow in the form of a person moved near the cot, but when she got up and went into the room, it was gone. My aunt's cot was moved up into another room and she stopped crying. My Gran was sitting in a window feeding one of my aunts. She was looking out of the window and she saw a small blue orb of light hopping around on the hedge. It did this for a while and shot off.
So much bad luck has happened since 1992 for my family, my mother's side. It could be a coincidence, but it just happens so often. First, in 1992, my uncle and his wife lost their jobs at 2 separate, completely different, unrelated businesses that went under. One night when driving home from an employment fair, he swerved to avoid something and hit a tree. The car wasn't even totaled, but a shard of his passenger window that was shattered by a tree branch severed his aorta and bled him out. First time his son tried a beer at 17 at a house party, the party was raided and he was arrested as an adult and thrown in jail for a few weeks, then longer when he got caught with a planted shiv. My grandparents had a commercial real estate company, and every business they sold a lot or building went under, every single one. None for the same reasons or related to the location, just things like someone died, someone gambled too much, random stuff. My sister was born a nonverbal autistic woman. All of my grandparents' siblings, both of them had 5 apiece, died except for one from either accidents or cancer. The one who is still alive has brain damage and a messed up face from being the target of an MS-13 gang random assault initiation in LA, so that is why he fled that area. Most companies we work for end up failing. I worked for a vet, then he severely injured himself and had to retire early. The next place I worked for was a pizza place who went under due to the owner's hidden alcoholism and him going nuts and assaulting a customer while plastered out of his mind one night. The hibachi I worked for caught fire one night. The high school I attended is going downhill due to lack of funding. I can list dozens of more terrible things that have happened that circulate around that side of the family. Seems like nothing good. TTL, DRR, when is bad luck in events no longer a coincidence, but something more?
How long does this go back, OP? Similar occurrences on my father's side of the family, but it goes back generations, like way back. I pray every day and ask God to please lift all generational blood curses or anything negative that has been sent towards me. This has helped, but I still have odd occurrences in my life.
I don't really know. Sorry for the incoming bloggish post. I feel it is cyclic. Now that I think about it, my grandparents had a lot of random stuff happen. My grandfather was a sheriff deputy until he got injured from a car T-boning his patrol vehicle. That is when he started real estate. My mom had to be raised by my great-grandparents some of the time. Speaking of which, my mother died 10 months after her diagnosis of skin cancer. It was a painful death. She went paralyzed from her toes to her neck over the course of 6 weeks. My dad is healthy. My grandmother on that side is 94 and still going strong. My mom's family's luck doesn't seem to affect them, even though they were in a poorer community. My dad has worked for the same company for almost 30 years. They even had the largest company disaster in history that killed 3,000 people in India, and it didn't go under. My mother became a homemaker because every business she worked for eventually went under for some strange reason. Like me, every business I worked for had some disaster unrelated directly to me occur. I'm managing a Starbucks now. I hope they are too big to fall. Besides prayer, any self-purification rituals I can do? I am married and we want to have a child within the next 5 years. If no bad luck happens to drain our savings or hurt our house, knock on wood. I do not want my child to have this hanging over him, her, if ITV is actually a thing. I want them to succeed like their father.
Mothers pass to sons, and fathers pass to daughters, genetically speaking, for certain traits. So maybe the same case for something like this. Just a theory of mine. My grandfather's parents died very young in their 40s, and his grandfather burned down a whole town supposedly by accident. I would dig deeper on your mom's side.
I'm convinced my family is cursed, stemming from something done by my Mexican grandmother. Grandmother is Catholic and has always been into the occult. Didn't know her biological mom. Grandma teaches me and my cousin to read tarot, respect spirits, don't mess with a Ouija, etc. Our family is a very odd mix. Grandma's firstborn and only son is very successful, my uncle. He is a multimillionaire and worked in White House very closely with one of our less liked presidents. The rest of the family is plagued. The firstborn male grandchild is addicted to spice, heroin, meth, literally every drug. Is a general plague on family. Abusive, mentally ill, thieves. The firstborn female grandchild is psycho and bipolar with lots of health problems. None of my grandmother's female children have had a successful relationship. All have divorced and all are single. My cousin and I noticed these patterns. Our lives are both plagued in their own ways. We've both been physically abused and suffered from illness. I have depression and anxiety, and my cousin is constantly having surgery for different illnesses. Almost everyone in the family suffers from chronic illness, whether mental or physical. It seems to me that some deal was made about the firstborn son of both generations, and that maybe some bad karma is following our bloodline. Does anyone have experience or knowledge on this kind of thing? Am I crazy for thinking this? I don't believe in coincidence, and this whole thing seems really off to me. I want to get rid of this negativity in my family and our lives, so advice on how to proceed is appreciated.
Hey X, I haven't been lurking here for very long, but I think I understand the basics here. Most people want to discuss unusual things, and some people just want to find some spooky stories. I have a collection of spooky stuff from my family I feel like sharing. So if you want to read some of the stories here, that's cool. All of it is real, or at least my family told me it was, but I trust them 100%. And most of it isn't really hard to believe anyway. A little bit of background, me and some parts of my family live in Africa, so some of the stories surround the local folklore and things like that. I'll start off with a little explanation of my dad. My dad was kind of the black sheep in his family. He had 3 other brothers who all outdid him in school and everything. He was also a huge delinquent apparently, always causing trouble and drinking at a young age, etc. His mom, Grandma, we called her since that was her famous phrase for everything, was so worried about his future she even sent him to a Sangoma, an African witch doctor who could supposedly tell the future. We had a little bit of history with the paranormal, but my dad was always a straight-up guy who didn't believe in that. Long story short, he ended up becoming the most successful out of his brothers, probably because his life turned around when he went and fought in the Angola Wars. I respect my dad a lot, so I believe him. But if I asked him now if he believed in spirits, he would definitely say yes. We went to a wedding of my cousins a few months ago, and me and my dad were chilling outside with some beers after the long night. For some reason, my dad just started talking about ghosts, so I guess he really only opens up about that stuff when he's drunk. Me and Dad sitting outside with a nice view of a lake. Dad points up to a house across the river with a weird triangular window at the top. That shape scares the crap out of me. When me and a couple of my friends were young, we went to go see a cricket game and we all got pretty tired quickly. We headed back to the flat we rented out at the time and saw a tall white guy standing in the attic window at the top. All four of us saw him. We called the police, and when they came, we looked around the house and no one was there. No sign of entry or anything either. I think that was when my dad started believing in the paranormal. He told me some more stuff since I kept asking him. My old dad, Pops, was a high-ranking officer in the Army. Him and a few other officers were supposed to fly over a bog to get to the next camp on the front lines, so they had to get onto a chopper. He was a part of the first group to leave, but as he was about to get on, some soldier came saying his attention was needed in the barracks, something about an important decision. He quickly apologized and left to follow the soldier, but after he turned the corner by the barracks, the guy was gone, vanished. The chopper quickly left and it was shot down by a RPG, no survivors. Basically, my grandpa would have died if it wasn't for this strange guy in sunglasses pulling him aside and then disappearing. No record of someone like him in the camp either, and my pops would know who was working in his regiment. Wasn't the first time weird things happened to my grandparents. Pops was more from a British heritage, so he wasn't too accustomed to Africa. My other grandfather had a dad who was a real Boer. African's farmer type, you know, the typical double barrel sitting on the front porch at night kind of guy. I never met him, but in Africa we have a legend of a small demon called a tokoloshe. The legend is really well known, and there have been thousands of sightings of these really short, goblin-looking things all over the country. Grandpa's dad owned a farm out in the mountain areas, employed around 30 workers to live and farm with him. His family lived in the main house with him while the workers lived out in the fields in their own houses. Many nights there would be problems. People seeing shadows in the night dancing, lights in the sky, etc. One night all of the workers were up in a panic. Someone spotted a supposed tokoloshe. Grandpa's dad ended up having to take the double barrel and find the thing in the fields. Apparently he ended up firing plenty of shots, but never killing it. Story is well known in my family, and my mom likes telling me about how they had to protect the farm against some sort of demonic entities. No joke, this happened like once every few months. Could have been sheep thieves, but they were apparently really short, around 4 foot tall or whatever Americans use for height. Had long ears and red eyes too, Google tokoloshe for reference. A lot of shit happens in Africa. The tokoloshe legend is really well rooted in local culture. The idea is a tokoloshe is a demon who steals souls and also kidnaps and drags people away in the dead of night. Many Africans sleep with their beds on top of bricks so that the tokoloshe couldn't reach them and drag them out to steal them away. Also so that nothing can hide under the bed. I've never seen one, but it is obviously something many people believe in. Some people in my class have seen some in the dead of night, and others even have people come in to bless their houses. Speaking of blessing houses, guess which dumbass lives in an actual haunted house? Yeah, me. The story was also something my dad told me. I used to be terrified of ghosts and aliens when I was young. I even had to visit therapy since I had sleeping issues. But eventually, when I was old enough, my dad told me some of the stories. Dad's brother is coming to visit the town for business, and stayed with my dad for a few days. Slept in the downstairs spare bedroom, the place where I am typing from now. Next morning they greet at breakfast, "How did you sleep?" and all that normal shit. Yeah, I slept fine. Could have done without all the music and people though. Obviously there wasn't a party in the house. Dad was confused, so he explained a bit more. That downstairs bedroom is messed up. I'm telling you, I heard a party going on. Music, voices, laughter, etc. Wasn't just my dad's brother who saw that stuff. Anyone who stayed there experienced a similar happening. This all came out like 2 months ago at a family get-together when everyone was nice and drunk to chat about spooky shit. My aunts also said when they stayed there, they woke up at like 2 a.m. with the entire floor covered in mist. Like actual white mist, you couldn't even see the floorboards. Needless to say, they ran out screaming. The room was icy cold too, and the fog had lifted when they came back like 10 minutes later with my dad to investigate. All this happened quite often, Even my other drunken uncle, who was literally afraid of nothing, was hesitant to sleep there. We sorted it out. Well, my dad did anyway. I was too young to even know about it. My grandparents were the really religious types, the local ones anyway, not from the British side of the family. They contacted the local church and we had a priest come by and bless the house. Since then I grew up and had many sleepovers and parties in that room with friends. None of us saw anything, so I'm happy my dad got it blessed so I could have a decent childhood. There are a couple more I can think of, though I appreciate the more subtle and questioning nature of spooky things, not the blatant, and he went missing and died bull. I like true stories. Another one was really recent. Me and my dad went hiking up one of the old mountains close by. We hiked up a long path of an archway of trees and we got to the top to take a breather. We both heard talking right around the corner of bushes. We walked past and there was no one there. Weird how it was so clear when I think about it, loud voices and like laughter, but we both heard it at the same time and it was just empty. Lots of people have been murdered on the mountain, but thankfully we keep our wits about and take dogs with us to make sure we are safe against muggings. This is one of the staffs we have at our house. I mainly use it as a walking stick when I go hiking. It has a weird design on it and it is old as all hell according to my grandpa. He got it from an old merchant in the rural mountains on holiday. It was already old when he bought it, like 50 years ago, but he kept it as a family heirloom, I guess. Apparently, like most ancient things in Africa, it is cursed, not the bullshit like, oh, it makes you sick or something. It's just that it has probably been used to kill. The old blade is very rusted, but still sharp as hell. There are all kinds of stains on it, but it supposedly brings you luck. I'll keep it for a while, but my grandpa always said he never liked the vibe of it. Something about how it made him feel very uneasy with it. Obviously, that isn't anything spooky, but it is significant since me and a lot of my friends don't like it much either. I can't really sleep if I know it's in the room, but that was a while ago. I just keep it downstairs, away from my bedroom. One of the spookiest things is definitely that mountain behind us. I go jogging up there very often, so you feel alone and isolated from a lot of people. I'll try get some pictures of it when I can. Me and my dad just spoke a bit, but he agrees with all the voices we've heard up there. I think almost any place with history has some sort of weird happening surrounding it, but more often now I'm hearing very clear and very obvious voices in places where I'm very alone on that mountain. I'm worried I'll actually hear someone coming at me and just think it's the voices again and end up getting mugged or something.
My family is cursed. Been trying to find out why for 11 years. I'll tell you why. The 5 relatives listed below are the only ones alive at this point of the story. The rest of aunts, uncles, etc. died, and I did not know them very well. When I was 1 year old, father gets electrocuted, becomes schizophrenic, PTSD, etc., deemed by doctors as permanently disabled. When I was 13 years old, mother breaks her neck and loses 99% of strength in both arms, permanently disabled. Go from comfortable middle-class living to low-income living, barely having enough food to last till the end of each month. 2 years later, grandparents, great-grandmother, great-aunt and aunt move far away. My parents decided to also move close to them. We all move. 1 week later, grandmother wakes up with lungs full of blood after puking the night before due to stomach flu. Suffocates on her own blood. Doctors say freak accident. Death happens on the first day of school. I wake up to, anon wake up, grandma died. Few weeks pass by. Aunt dies due to the doctor prescribing 2 medications that have a side effect of death when mixed. Few weeks pass by. Thanksgiving Day, I wake up to anon wake up. Great-grandmother died. Few weeks later, my great-aunt dies. Grandfather, devastated by grandmother's death, disowns the rest of the family, won't talk, answer calls, wants nothing to do with anyone. He gets diagnosed with lung cancer and dies weeks later. Misfortune continues forever. Has to be a curse, and I'm not even superstitious.
I know that feel. I was cursed by both sides of my family at and before birth. By one side by Christianity, so that God would punish me as a bastard, and I would fail in all things. On the other side by the devil, so that my life would always be an endless death curse and unending ordeals and suffering. Needless to say, both sides of the family hate each other, and there is a bit of everything involved. Explosion death killed 3 family members at once, leaving pieces of flesh that were all heaped into a collective coffin. Best uncle agonizingly died of cancer when I was 2. Semi-rich family head, who was an asshole, on one side, left no will and all land was taken by the state and random unknown people calling themselves relatives who we never met. Other good uncle died before my birth by electrocution after 3 days in agony of full body charring. The wife spends all the money on parties and luxury, drugs, alcohol, violence, theft, divorce, and betrayal everywhere. Living in the USA, several family members sexually aggravated by law enforcement, state workers, and neighbors go to Mexico and suffer similar fates. Religion, dedication, and belief makes no difference. Suffer finding jobs that end shortly through freak causes. Random theft blaming son of foreman breaks into house, business closure, etc. Most pets are killed or disappear on both sides of the family. Become angry at the system for screwed up life and become targeted by the state. And it goes on and on. At least things have changed now that I know I was cursed and actually broke that wide open. However, the most you can do is save yourself. You'll even learn some neat things along the way. I learned, for example, that I will never have any actual lasting friendships or relationships and will actually find common allies instead for the rest of my life. Among other interesting things.
I'm not sure whether this qualifies as a paranormal issue or not, but the occurring, tragic to say the least, happening in one family is what prompts me to seek others' opinion. Please bear with me as I narrate a long story. This series of events happened during 1970 to 84 at Bangalore, India, for which I was a partial observer as a friend of the affected family. In the year 1970, our family moved from a small 2-bedroom rented house in Bangalore to a 2-story house built by my father, slightly on the outskirts of the city. Of course, today it has become the center of the city. My father worked in a nearby college whose employee society had purchased a row of plots on the outskirts and distributed them to its employees based on a lottery system. My father was one of the lucky ones and built a decent house there, which still stands to this day. Next to our house was an empty plot, and next to that was a small house built by another employee of the college, a low-paid attendant. Since the attendant could not generate sufficient funds for building the house, he and his younger brother jointly built the 2-bedroom house. Let me simply call the attendant as A and his younger brother as B. The house was registered in the name of A, as he was the employee of the college. B worked elsewhere in another low-paid job. A had a wife and 5 children. The eldest was a boy, let me call him S, slightly elder than myself, and 3 more sons and 1 daughter. B had a wife and only 1 daughter, let me call her P, who was younger to me by 2 years or so. I was around 10 years old at that time. There was an old woman who was the mother of A and B and was aged around 70 years. A and B had an elder sister who used to live nearby and was always seen visiting the house. I was very friendly with S and P and used to spend hours with them playing. A had dug a well at the back of the house and there was plenty of water in it at a depth of hardly 20 feet. During the mid-1970, my family performed a grihapravesham or house warming ceremony before moving into the new house, and my father naturally invited A and his whole family, including B and his family. On the day of the function, no one from this family attended the function. Later on, we came to know from A that his brother B's wife had expired just a couple of days prior to the function, and they were very distraught and could not attend the function. She was very healthy and the doctor could not say why she died. B was hardly 35 years of age and his wife was around 30 years. Some months later, it so happened that all the elders in that house went for a function and were slated to return only by night 10 p.m. or so. S asked me to stay with them until their parents returned, and I agreed. While chatting and playing in their house, P told us that she wanted to play a different game. She took a piece of chalk and drew a large enough square on the living room floor with the alphabet yes, no, etc., which I much later realized to be a crude form of Ouija board, with an upturned glass tumbler and a lighted candle inside. It was soon extinguished due to lack of oxygen. She said that she wanted to call her mother's spirit and asked me and S to take part in it. We both were astonished that at such a young age this girl was about to call spirits and the calm way she proceeded to do that. At that age, I had no knowledge about spirits and boards, and I was quite sure S knew nothing about it too. Anyway, we both looked at each other with amusement and thought that the girl was just crazy and decided to play along with her. I have no recollection of what exactly she asked the spirit, assuming that there was one, but the glass tumbler did move here and there, and we both believed that P moved it, although she vehemently denied our accusations. Anyway, after a considerable time, P simply wiped off the written contents on the floor as it was time for the elders to arrive. Later on, I just forgot about the whole thing for ages. A couple of months later, the sister of A and B, who was a regular visitor to their house, was stricken with a strange disease which no doctor could recognize or treat. She started becoming thinner and thinner, refusing to take food. Over a period of 8 to 9 months, she became so frail that she was confined to bed and ultimately died with that strange disease. Before the family could recover from this shock, the old woman of the house died. Of course, she was over 70 and distraught at the loss of daughter. This can be treated as a natural death. But just a few months later, A's brother, who was just 30 years old, died suddenly, leaving P an orphan. It was speculated that he died of a heart attack, but it was rare in those days to die of cardiac arrest at such a young age. P was lucky to have A as her uncle, who not only looked after her as his own daughter, but willed the whole house in her name, fearing his sons may disown her later in her life. These 3 deaths occurred within a period of 1.5 years. Within the next 1 year, the husband of the aunt, A's sister, died suddenly too, with no particular ailment. Next unfortunate incident happened around 3 years later, when A himself died suddenly, probably due to cardiac arrest, just at the age of around 40 years. By now, the family had witnessed 5 deaths in a span of approximately as many years. My friend S and his whole family were now orphans. At that time, S was still pursuing his pre-degree education, but was forced to discontinue and start working in a small factory to support the family, which he did wholeheartedly, and even took upon the job of looking after P and caring for her. The next big shock to the family was the death of A's youngest brother a year later, who was hardly 8 years of age. He had developed fever for a couple of days, which did not subside and died suddenly in spite of having good medical care. The final death was again a year later, but most shocking and mysterious as well. Another younger brother of S, who was around 13 years of age, one day started complaining of severe thirst. No amount of water or any liquid could satisfy him. Later in the day, the family found that he was missing from home. Any amount of search in the colony yielded no result, and nobody had seen him leave the house either. The family spent the whole night worried about him. Next morning, when S was at the back of the house, he noticed someone sitting deep inside the well on a small step just above the water level. During construction of wells, a series of stones are placed on a spiral on the wall of the well from top to bottom so that people can climb down into the well when the need arises. He recognized the figure as his missing brother. When help arrived and with great difficulty the brother was brought out, he was found dead hours ago. He did not drown, but he was bent towards water as though he wanted to drink directly from the well. This was the 7th death in the family in roughly 8 or 9 years. When all this was happening, it was noticed that P had grown extremely selfish and had developed a level of hatred towards the family which was taking care of her. She was also romantically attached to the brother of one of her classmates, who was nearly 15 years elder to her and desperately wanted to marry him. When S tried to reason with her, she argued fiercely and ultimately ordered the whole family to move out of the house, now that the house stands in her name. Although his father was a major contributor to the house, my friend S left the house with his mother and surviving siblings and with great difficulty has managed to come up in life. In spite of being evicted from the house, he holds no grudge towards P and tries his best to maintain cordial relations with her. On her part, P married the man of her choice and lives happily in the same house, of course, with major modifications and refurbishments to make it as per her choice. A point to note here is that since S and family moved out of that house, no unfortunate deaths have happened. P and her family are healthy despite living in the same house.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.